Well, good evening, everybody. This is the monthly BayChi program. We have been running this on Tuesdays at 7:30 since 1989. And we have speakers every month. And we've only missed two in the last whatever it is, 30 years or something. And tonight we are not having Kat Meyer, but we are going to talk about managing communities. Kate has had a family emergency, and Nancy is going to direct a conversation among us, which will be fairly intimate, talking about a very important thing that we all are living with and have been living with in COVID. But I want to start by just telling everybody that
back up. You're on the last slide. There you go.
That we are the BayChi chapter of the Association for Computing Machineries, cChi, and ACM's huge organization, technical organization. At times we have been as the biggest cChi in the world. We certainly are in the Bay Area, which has the probably biggest group of human-computer interaction researchers and developers in the world. And we often send out to many of them that want a newsletter on a monthly basis. And we also have various forums that we care about. We have a consultants list that we keep up, and we have a jobs bank that we don't keep up as much anymore. We have this newsletter, we have the monthly meetings, and we have Birds of a Feather. Please consider joining. It's $20 a month.
No, a year.
A year. And that covers our costs to keep this running for another 20 or 30 years, I hope. But in any case, we also have this Birds of a Feather, which happens on the fourth Tuesday at this time. And Edwin Lee runs that. And it's been an interesting conversation among people that are coming into the Chi community and people that are veterans about careers. We have a new volunteer that's going to be working with me on a Chi tools buff, where we're going to talk about, what it's like to work with, Figma or OBS or whatever, and we're gonna have little discussions about that, probably on the third Tuesday of the month. On the first Thursday of the month, I want all of you guys to consider joining our steering committee. Our steering committee is a time when we talk about what the people that are running BayChi have been doing for the last month, but more than that, we talk about any meetings we're putting together, any structural things we want to do with BayChi, these BOFs, and other things. For example, one of the things that we care about right now is the treasurer. We have an interim treasurer who has graciously taken over as our treasurer, who had worked hard at it, took her leave. And so Steve Williams is doing that, but he doesn't want to continue doing that. So it's an officer. You get to be an officer of BayChi, which has its perks, I've been told. And consider sending an email to officers@baychi.org if you want to find out more about what that's like. Of course, there's lots of other ways to help BayChi. And we believe that Eleanor Burgess, if we're lucky, is going to take over the media and outreach part of the organization, which Nancy Frischberg has been doing for many years and continues to do it, the publicity chair. And we've been working very hard over the last 6-8 months on putting all of our old videos on YouTube. And you'll see what's exciting about that is we are getting more hits on those videos when they first get run into YouTube than we ever got in these meetings at all. So it's a very important thing. And I would love somebody that would want to work with our person that's doing the editing of these videos to make them to do a critique to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And maybe some of them need a little bit of extra help. In any case, there's many things one can do. And if you have a Birds of a Feather that you would like to run, a smaller gathering, that's that's a possibility as well. And we have other things that we can talk about. So just come to the steering meeting on first Thursday, and we can talk about that. Now, without any more further ado, on the other hand, I want to first mention that in your if you don't see a closed caption in your Zoom bar at the bottom, there is the ability to turn on closed captioning, and I encourage you to do that if it's helpful. I find it helpful to refer to words that I missed in something that went by, and some people need it because they don't hear. So that's even a better reason to do it. Okay, and so Nancy, why don't you introduce the topic and
Sure.
and get people discussing it.
Well, let me first say that I'm delighted to see our guests tonight in the audience, and I'm hoping that everyone will join in the conversation. I picked this topic in part because it relates very much to collaboration, which is a topic I have been exploring over the past, I don't know, 3 to 5 years with another person, and in hopes that we were going to write something huge, and he went and we lost him about 1.5 years ago. So my work on that has paused, but it's certainly close to my heart. And I know people who have taken on jobs as community manager where they actually get paid for it. And then also, I need to hold on one second. So anyway, we have
I want to encourage everyone to turn on their video, because this is going to be a conversation, not a talk tonight.
Hold on one second. I'll be right. And we're all concerned about him. Okay. So anyway, one of the things, are we seeing everybody? Not quite. Okay. I do invite you to turn on your video if you haven't been full of video all day. I understand there are good reasons for not turning on your video, besides the fact that you're fed up with it for the day. So choose as you like, or maybe later as the conversation goes on, you'll be willing to show yourself when we speak. So I know that people that I have met, people who have the role of community manager way before COVID hit. But I think the fact that we have been working from home more or exclusively, and need to find more good ways to interact with one another around both our vocational and our avocational interests, means that because of Zoom and other kinds of tools, we Slack, let's make sure everybody acknowledges that there are lots of possibilities for how a community might be organized and what technology it can adopt to support the organization. And at the same time, I think that there may be some helpful hints that people have about, or telltale experiences in working in communities that were highly functional or not very functional. And I'd like to hear about that as well. Unfortunately, we will not be joined this evening by Kat Meyer, who is the director recently hired of communities and events at Rosenfeld Media, who just concluded a successful 2-day conference on design ops, if I'm not mistaken, which is a topic that didn't even exist 10 years ago. And so part of what Rosenfeld is doing, intriguingly to me, is they are developing these large communities, or hoping they will become large, and then running a kind of continuous conversation and supports for people with those specific interests, while planning for an annual or a biannual conference. That would be conference meaning simultaneous, maybe hybrid, maybe only virtual. And so they've been developing this larger structure of community to support the several different kinds of conferences they've been doing. So I was intrigued by that. I was intrigued that Kat would tell us about how she came out of the book publishing industry, and now, as she calls herself, that she's on the emerging trends at the intersection of content, conferences, and community. And so her new gig is definitely giving her an opportunity to stick in that that confluence, those three kind of streams that are all flowing together. But I'm hoping that tonight we can, the several of us who are here, can have a conversation about how did we get here? What kinds of communities have we been involved in that have been managed or not managed? And what makes for a successful community? Anyway, I have a bunch of questions that I'd like to pose to our group. So since we're so small, I'm going to suggest that we introduce ourselves briefly. Let's take like 1 minute so that we know a little bit about each other. And then we can go into some of these questions I've prepared, but I'm also very interested to hear the questions you came with. So don't forget those. I'll just start again. My name is Nancy Frischberg. I'm currently retired from being a UX researcher, although I'm happy to continue to coach people and teams. And then I also am involved in several other projects that are community-based, I guess we should say that. So I do have a personal interest in this notion of managing communities. And I've been a longtime Bake High volunteer and sitting down front in the auditorium when we used to get together on a regular basis. So anybody else can jump in and
I'm going to say a word.
Good.
I'm Ted Selker. I'm the chair of Bake High, and I run several research teams on considerate systems, thinking about how social feedback is critical in user experience. Currently, I am building a community around called Alfie, around advancing women, and there's a whole lot I can say about these things, but the image that came to mind when Nancy was talking for a minute was of Brad Templeton having a birthday party about a year ago, where he had everybody be able to use every social media platform he could imagine. So he had people in rooms where you could hear people if you were close or farther away from him. You had Zoom. You had these things where and you've seen these auditoriums where you have a poster and people can go over and walk to the poster. He didn't have that one, but he had like 10 of them. And the real heart, and what's really great about that would be you could imagine that people would cluster in one or another and the other. And we did that a bit, but it was so damn distracting that what we found ourselves doing is all gravitating back to Zoom. And actually, it was so traumatic that people more or less didn't even bother using the breakout rooms after a while. They just wanted to be together. So, I mean, maybe somebody else that was in that thing would characterize it differently, but it's really, I think, a dance between these technological capabilities and just focusing on the people. So that's kind of one place I'd start with this topic. You're muted, Nancy. You're muted, Nancy.
Yes, I just heard you, but I was trying to point at the same time. Okay, good. So I'm taking notes. And so I recorded your comment there, Ted, on the topic that you were especially interested in. Jeff, you want to jump in here?
Sure, I'll briefly introduce myself. So I've been involved in various startups and whatnot, and for quite a while. Was a co-founder and main designer of one of the first user content-based communities called Pearl Soup back around 2001. And I had some experiences around managing that community. It was not a very large community. What we did was we gathered stories of people's personal experiences, true stories. The idea was so that other people could learn from them. It was called pearlsoup.com. Doesn't exist anymore for a variety of reasons. We had about 14,000 stories on the website and pioneered a bunch of things for self-organizing user content-based sites. I kind of felt like the mayor of that site. And we had our problems. We had one, if you can imagine, only one really bad troll who we had to kick off multiple times and learned a few things, maybe didn't learn some things from that. Anyway, so most recently I was a conversation UX designer at Apple on contract for a year and a half until last September. Now I'm kind of working in the Humane Technology, Center for Humane Technology stuff, not working for them. Went through their course and very interested in that. So we're eating dinner, so I'm going to keep my video off probably for most of the time, but just so you know, I'm here and listening.
Feel free to jump back in when you can. Who wants to go next? Edwin, Sarah, Kim,
I'll go.
Carl? Okay.
So my name is Edwin Lee. I'm currently Beikai's vice chair, and you are all welcome to consider unseating me in the next elections. I am a UX designer, have been so for roughly 14, 15-ish years, with some 7-ish years before that as a user experience designer. I came to UX from an interest in cognitive science, learning how we think, and then designing how best to fit and support how we think. So I am currently working as a designer for Intuitive Surgical, working on some management aspects of their folks who are going to be using their digital applications. So most of my experience has been in designing for the usability of web applications, sort of continuing that now. I've had fantastic experiences with Beikai over the last 10, 12, something like that years, both as an attendee and as part of the leadership team for many years. It is a huge place to go for anytime you're feeling down, anytime you're feeling maybe less surrounded by people interested in UX or who think about UX, to be reminded that you're not the only one who thinks about these things. And along those lines, Ted mentioned it, but that once a month I do on that fourth Tuesday, essentially a get together on Zoom here to discuss however it is you're doing, whatever it is you're facing, and just a place to share. So
Cool. Sarah, I saw you turn on your video. Would you care to share? Introduce yourself.
Hi. I've actually never joined a Beikai meeting before. I just saw it on, I think, on newsletters. I just decided to join. And right now, I am not sure if I have enough experience to join. So I am currently studying human-computer interaction at University of Maryland as a graduate student, second-year graduate student. And before my current program, I had in my undergrad, I actually did a triple major in physics, psychology, and computer science. So I think human-computer interaction is like a natural combination. And I think, so most of my undergrad, I was doing academic research in mostly psychology. And then in one of my projects, I just, it's like a, we designed cars for rats, and that's how I got into something about user experience, because we had to observe them a lot to understand their behavior. And it's just I think the whole area is just very interesting. That's how I first know about HCI, and I decided to join this current program. Yeah, cool. I think that's everything I have.
Well, let me just say you're definitely welcome, and you have plenty of experience in being in communities, even ones that are not digital, that you can share with us and reflect on. And so you're perfectly fine. Uh-oh, Kim disappeared. Too bad.
Thank you. Oh, also because I'm currently in the East Coast, so for my time is a bit late, so I might disappear in the next 20 or 30 minutes.
I understand, but I appreciate your being here. Thank you so much. And we will, I didn't say this already, but we will try to find a time to bring Kat back and have her respond to all the things that we're going to talk about today, so that we can hear more directly from her, because I think she has plenty to share with us as well. Thank you, Sarah. Carl, you willing to speak now, or you want to save it?
I'll speak, but stay hidden.
Okay, whichever you like.
I guess I was not expected to talk. But the
What brings you to this meeting? That's the real question.
Well, first, I'm also involved with the Silicon Valley ACM SIGGRAPH chapter. So
Okay.
a little plug for that, which also involves with the computer-human interaction.
Sure.
But and my interest goes, back a long time. As matter of fact, was thinking back to Myron Kruger's pitching video place for bicentennial. So
Yep.
and as interesting ideas back then, and we're still kind of working on that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But it's yeah, it's and only recently have I gotten more into social media here, and I'm trying not to be a troll myself here by my interactions.
By the way, the Myron Kruger reference, for people that don't know, this guy made the first interactive exploratory spaces for museums, among other things, in the late 70s. This is a very historic man and work.
Yeah, this was he was trying to pitch it for the bicentennial in 76.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was a genius at electronics, and I kind of tagged along with him, and he ended up working at IBM Watson for some time. So
it's a well-connected world here, the world of UX, and because I think Ted and I both worked for IBM at different times. He in the research division longer than me.
Wow.
So anyway.
But part of it is, I see the problem sometimes with, interactions, myself even getting, agitated about things you see on social media. And so it's interesting how to try to manage those emotions, and some of the conferences, they present new interactions, and it's always kind of like starting over learning AI. So or the interface. So I understand when they had that wide collection of the ones, there's a lot of like, let's simplify it. Yes. And get back to basics. Anyway, so thank you for holding these talks.
Sure. Well, you're welcome to be here, and thank you for participating. So let me see. That's a question.
Well, Steve, Steve, do you want to say anything or not really?
I think Steve's probably not on.
Yeah, Steve.
Did we ever?
Our constant. He creates the technology that we depend on for finding out about Big Chi, and is very involved with making.
So yeah, I think he forgot to sign out.
It's all right.
But I'm not going to do anything about it. It's fine.
Nancy, you probably want to get to your questions, probably. Right?
Sure. So I guess one of my first questions, I'm going to try a little collection of questions here. And what makes, the basic one is what makes for successful online communities? And then my sub questions to that are there some formulas that we ought to follow, or some proscriptions that we ought to prevent? Is it the same for a hybrid community that's online and in person? Are there different terms of success or criteria for success for in-person communities versus an online? And do we know what gets in the way of an online community from being successful? So let me just start with that little collection, and when anybody has data or experience to report.
I don't think I have any, certainly I don't think I have any formal knowledge about how best to support communities, but I feel I've done a lot of community building over my, whether here in UX or in other areas of my life. But one of the things that I think is actually quite important is a sense of and this feels like a simple thing, but like a regular time that people think can just count on things happening. Like if you're a community that has meetings, it's better to have, as we do here, let's say every Tuesday or every other Tuesday, or once a month, every second Tuesday, than it is to sort of like let that float around and just be sort of an ad hoc. Oh, well, let's meet tomorrow. Let's meet the next day. Because not everybody's
having a predictable schedule, you feel is an aspect of a successful community.
Right, because then there's a feeling of, I don't know if permanence is the right word, but reliability about it, something you can count on. One of the communities that I had held together for a good amount of time was a hobby of mine, dancing, where we would meet on the Tuesday. Like we chose a meeting day during the week. It was a weekly thing. It would have to be, either Tuesday or Wednesday was our opening suggestions, because we often traveled on weekends for conventions out of town. And someone might go early on a Tuesday, early on a Thursday or a Friday. They might not come home until Monday. So really Tuesday and Wednesdays were sort of the most reliable, most protected days in that regard. And I think that was critical. Like you might come back, you might be zonked out on Monday, but by Tuesday you'd have had a day to recover, that sort of thing.
So what's interesting about this schedule idea is when Tom Mitchell tried to make a scheduling program at Carnegie Mellon, he found that it would start getting all organized, the AI, to recognize people's patterns, like you're talking about recognizing patterns as part of people getting synced up. And then at the end of the semester, it always break apart, of course. And so what is it about universities or other organizations where they can have a disruption that happens on a regular basis that does not destroy the community? And that's kind of an interesting question relative to the thing you were just talking about. Because yes, that is a very nice prosthetic you just described of having an expectation that doesn't break of a time.
So I'm eager to go back to something that Carl said and pick up on that and see if we can explore it a little more. And that is this notion of a troll. And I recall being on the reviewing panel for a big government grant that involved, 3 or 5 universities. And this was way early. This was like 1988 or 89 and the topic of the grant was networked classrooms. And these were networked classrooms within like a community college system for English instruction, or at a private school for English instruction. They had several different kinds of campuses. And the interesting thing was, for example, when 2 different campuses of the community college had classes that were paired to communicate with each other, you got troll behavior and nasty comments immediately. And we spent some time during the reviewing board meetings saying, where does this come from? What's happening here? Is this, as we get more familiar with the technology, will it go away or will it just continue? And now think about this, because the book that was written about this was finished in like 1990. And of course, trolling has only gotten more huge and spam has expanded beyond belief. And so these negative patterns are there for us still. Now, even in that case, it was a network classroom. People all were identified, to their instructor. So it wasn't like anybody was really hiding, but the instructors had to take measures to say, be polite to the people in the other section. You don't know them yet, but they are your classmates also. I mean, crazy things, but these were young adults. And that was my first experience with trolls and spamminess in what I considered a protected environment, a school environment, right? So that was the interesting thing for me about that. And I don't think at that point we had great mechanisms to counter it, except this business of let those students get acquainted with each other before they hit the networked classroom tools.
So I've got a great story about this and a thought, if it's all right.
Okay.
So I was in a meeting where the CEO of IBM wanted to learn about chat systems. And so they put him in front of one of these bulletin boards. And he said, he typed in, hi, I'm Lou. And what came back was, hey, Lou, want a screw? And he said, oh, that's exactly what I was expecting. And what's interesting is that from the very beginning of email and texting and social media of every sort, when you are outside of your community and you don't know people, the thing is you want to be noticed. And so people do all sorts of things to be noticed, and they go dramatic. And this is my theory, is that it's a matter of if you're disembodied and you want to have power, you want to have control, you want to feel an effect of what you do that. And I believe that intentional communities are one of the ways that we can get rid of that, where you are not just with people that you know, but you're with people for a purpose, and that purpose becomes what you know. And that's what's sad about Nancy's story, actually, is that they were there for a purpose, and yet they still were having these people trying to be dramatic, trying to get attention, trying to be disruptive. But lastly, I have a friend named Rob Barrett. He was a researcher at IBM, working for me for many years. Fantastic guy. And he's trying to make now a bunch of ideas around making communities where they are positive and the leadership is organically grown. But that's a whole topic that's fascinating to me also.
Cool. Any other comments on successful communities or the keys? So one of the questions I thought of, and I don't know how everybody will respond to this, is it seems like if you're the community manager, you need to be an extrovert somehow to be able to talk to people. And yet I would expect there are all kinds of introverts who are good at having the private conversation with somebody who seems a little lost, or, being able to manage somebody who's maybe asking for too much attention. I think that's sort of the way Ted was describing that. So I'm wondering if anybody has a feeling about introvert versus extrovert being a good community manager. You don't have to have it this minute. You could have it later.
Jerry.
As a sometime introvert, maybe most of the time introvert, I found that if I'm trying to build a community, especially an in-person one, I think ultimately the effect is, well, first, I try to build it as on a one-on-one relationship basis. So if I have a sense of someone who I think might be a good part of the community, I might foster that relationship a little over whatever little bit of time, then approach them individually about, hey, we have this thing, would you like to join us? Ultimately, what that means is the community grows slowly and probably doesn't get huge, at least not right away. But there's a sense of these are the types of people that we want to recruit. Maybe these are the qualities and sort of laying out for my members. These are the qualities we're looking for. Someone who takes criticism well, who has other people's interests in mind and tries to keep them there. And whether it's then me just doing the invitations, or sort of everybody now you're all deputized to invite people. And so that's sort of an intentional, these are the values of our community. You're all welcome to spread.
Let me push back just for a minute, but I do want to recognize Jeffrey too, because I know you were about to say something. And Edwin, when we were entertaining Kat speaking, one of the reasons I was so intrigued by her job and the fact that she stepped into it was, this is scaling way big, right?
Mhm.
So that they're looking for thousands of people in a community about design ops or about enterprise computing and UX or whatever they are. So this business of, I mean, by the same token, Kat herself has a standard welcome message, and then she tries to follow up with every new person who joins. So that's like labor intensive for sure, and pretty amazing that she can even approach that. But there are a whole bunch of things she's doing in the background that I could observe even by just a little bit of time in the Rosenfeld ecosystem. I mean, I agree with you. For an in-person thing, then you really want to develop a personal relationship. Jeff, what were you about to say before we got off on this track?
So it's actually a little bit of a different track, so I hope that's okay in this context. So just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One of the things that has been held up as an example of a successful community in the circles that I travel in is a front porch community in Vermont. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but it's an extremely successful community that's focused primarily on Vermont, and there's also some membership from the surrounding states, but they have something, I forget the exact number, but it's something like 80% of people, adults in Vermont, belong to this community. I mean, it's,
wow.
You know, the saturation rate is unbelievable.
That's
and
awesome.
They've developed
right,
yeah,
that's 660,000 people, right?
Very
I don't know, I
large,
made
and
that number up. It's a little bit larger than that, but yes.
It's huge saturation, and they've developed a number of rules to moderate this that are kind of interesting. The
Okay.
main one that comes to mind is that you can only post once a day. So that means that in a discussion, you cannot get into a back and forth flame war. You only have one coin, so to speak, that you can spend each day. So you're probably going to use it to say something more meaningful, at least presumably. And they have other, moderation. Every comment, I think, goes through a moderator or something to that effect. There's somebody posted the URL.
Thank you.
Anyway, so that's worth looking at. But the other thing I was going to mention is I've been thinking a lot lately about how to handle moderation on vast scales like Facebook, that sort of scale.
Right.
It seems to me that, people have been trying to do it with AI. Certainly, Facebook has invested a lot of resources in AI and whatnot, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't scale it could theoretically, it could scale, except that it doesn't really recognize things well enough. And it's not likely to recognize things well enough and fast enough anytime soon, because as soon as certain terms get recognized and are moderated out by AIs, they come up with euphemisms. There's another term for that. I can't remember at the moment. So it'll be
Or
some rhyming slang or, sorry?
Or an intentional misspelling.
Yeah, exactly. Those kinds of things. So there's all these code words, essentially. There's even a word for that sort of speak. It's kind of like leet speak, but some different thing. And I think that what we're going to need is we need a scaling infrastructure of humans to moderate. And I know some communities have attempted to do that. I think it needs to be done in a more robust way. And, I've kind of tried to imagine maybe every time you flag a comment and that gets taken down because maybe two other people also flag it, you get, 1/10,000,000th of a Bitcoin or something, or some status, reward or something of that sort. So, of course, in order for something like this to work, these organizations like Facebook actually have to be invested in it. And unfortunately, their business models frequently depend on crazy controversy and conspiracy theories and all of that to get more viewers and more. So there is a problem there. But I think something like that could work on a larger scale if the organization was not incentivized to spread mis and disinformation. anyways, I'm just throwing that out. If anybody has any ideas for how that might work, I think it'd be interesting to talk about.
I think I've seen something similar to the front porch, if that's the right word. So in the summer, I interned as UX research intern in Inflow. So that's an app that helps people with adult ADHD, and I've seen similar features in some other mHealth apps. They usually have a community with like daily questions, and people can post there, and people can leave comments and likes, and there's usually always a button that you can report to the admin. So I think it's similar. I don't really know how to, if like things are more complicated and people are not gathered there because they share similar struggles or health or mental health issues. If it's not that case, I don't really know how to like monitor that. But that's just an example as well.
Cool. Well, if we've exhausted that question for the moment, let me pose this question. Is community management a UX job? Thank you for that reference, Carl. I'll put it in my notes. So let me say it again. Do we care whether this has a answer or not? That's the other question. And what are the arguments in favor of community management being a UX role, and what are the arguments against it? Are there any? Or do we care? The fascinating thing to me to look at the Rosenfeld, just the reason I put that question in, looking at Rosenfeld and the fact that they focus on UX so that the content of all their publications and their conferences is all about UX. And so it makes me think that everything is UX in some way. But community management, of course, means, do people have the capability to use the tools that you're suggesting? And how do the tools relate to the community? And also, is the content of the conversation really all that important to the person who's the community manager? Does it make a difference whether the person is knowledgeable about what the purpose of the community is to be a adequate community manager?
So I wonder, what does it mean on some level? Oh, go ahead, Jeffrey, please.
I'll just chime in on that one. I don't think that it's necessary because, it's kind of like the meeting facilitation paradigm, where to be a good facilitator, you really don't need to know that much about the content. Maybe a little knowledge of the language is useful, but basically you're a process person. And I think that's what moderators are about also. And one other thing I wanted to just throw in is the organization New Public did a report on what they called signals. It's basically any of you who were familiar with Christopher Alexander's pattern language for design of architecture. It's basically a pattern language for design of digital public spaces, and highly recommend checking it out if you're not familiar with it. New Public. And so they've been very concerned about how one structures these things.
I'm taking notes. Yeah, I can go for that. That the comparison to meeting facilitation, Jeffrey, that was fine. I appreciate that. That was a good one.
So this question of what is user interface? There are people that pretend they're user interface designers, that are graphic designers. There are people that are cognitive psychologists that think they know everything about user interface. The question is user interface with computers is what we what this field has typically been about. I think it's going to be more and more about human-human communication interactions that matter as part of this field, as you're kind of suggesting. But I think that, meeting facilitation is a field, and media and communication are things that people get degrees in. So we don't need to take that away from those people. On the other hand, as we build new technology, whether it be House Party or something that builds communities, certainly the user interface issues and successes are critical for anybody that cares about HCI to be aware of, and to try to contribute to too.
Yeah. So relatedly, I was going to ask, there seems to me, excuse me, and we've already referred to an admin as somebody who might be acting in some cases as a partial moderator, but maybe not all the full responsibility of a moderator. And then you have the next in the hierarchy, which is like Kat, where she's the director of events and community for several communities of related UX professionals. So, we're getting to this kind of hierarchy where I would claim that the admin probably doesn't need to know even as much as a meeting facilitator. However, are they going to be equally effective unless you have a moderator or somebody who's a little bit familiar with the content? So that's a question I'm posing, and I don't have a specific answer to it. I think there are these three different kinds of roles that we're talking about, right? Administrative, moderators, and community managers.
So I guess I want to just bring up something weird, as I sometimes do, which is if you think about the communities that have been successful in society, they are family, religion, state, and companies, right? Those are the ones that, Sapien will talk about, that book, and the people are associated with more or less. But what's impressive to me is that within those communities that you're part of, it is not adversarial. It is not about drama. Drama happens between communities in general. And so when we think about the problems we have with drama in social media and in communities we make online, in some sense, that is a counterexample to the history of community building, which is about building groups that are very good to each other and good to themselves.
Also, I think if I think of some communities, most of them are like student organizations I was in, there is not a role that is actually the manager or the admin. Everybody is checking on everybody else. So if somebody did not did something that's not polite, you don't wait till the manager to point it out, someone else will point it out. And the manager or the leader role, it's more like how to say, like when things got escalated, so it's like it needs to be another step. But in a lot of communities I feel comfortable in, people are like a peer monitoring is also like part of the system that goes before to have an admin or manager.
Okay. Comments about Sarah's observation? It says yes. Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Two groups I've been more active in is either Nextdoor or Wikipedia. So Nextdoor does have some of those layers of moderations, some, being referred to, but there's also like the corporation itself, which might step in at points if need be and actually with the recent politics, a lot of people have kind of left the platform because they did not like being, going to next door jail or whatever they call it, that kind of thing that you got suspended for so long or
Mhm.
I even got a warning here about misinformation because I posted a link or info about how misinformation gets spread around. So they got, I think part of it, they're overstaffed or understaffed in terms of handling those issues, at that level. And they kind of do a cursory response or just kind of a knee-jerk reaction to handling it, and unless it's at the local level, it's easy for them to kind of react poorly or slap both sides or whatever. You're both fighting here, and that's the problem. It's not who's right or wrong. It's like the fighting's the wrong part. So and Wikipedia just has so many layers and all kinds of complex social issues that one never knows where the end of those things are. There's so many. They talk about wiki lawyering, and all kinds of rules and guidelines and stuff. So it's a vast thing that you can't find the end. You can't see where the edge is sometimes.
Right. And I want to reference here that Bekai has had a conversation about Wikipedia and some of those editorial and administrative issues by Ed Chi a number of years ago. But if you go back and look at our past programs and look for his name, his last name is spelled in English CHI, like Kai, but it's Ed Chi. Anyway, and he is the person who invented the term and gave the evidence for the term scent of information. I don't know if everybody's heard that, but he has also been very active in some of those administrative roles and making policy about who gets to post on Wikipedia and how, and when can you post and when can't you, and stuff like that. So yes, Wikipedia is a great example of a community that has developed around encyclopedic knowledge, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so one of the things I was going to talk with Kat about is the fact that she has moved from her comfort zone, in a sense, working for these book fairs and large organizations like the Frankfurt Book Fair and so on, which are putting on shows related to books, right? So that's what she was at the nexus of publication and technology and content. So one of the things that I think has happened is that she has embraced the content of some of these areas that she was less familiar with, and she's been able to, move that interest that one community has in certain issues and make sure it gets applied to another community, which may not realize that they have to they ought to pay attention to these things. I'm thinking here where she was instrumental in organizing the meeting and the community and the scheduling of a program last November around accessibility. And she said this really did have an influence on how she's been thinking about implementing the subsequent communities and meetings that she's been organizing. So let me put it to you. Have you learned things from being in one community that you've been able to apply more widely and that you think are really important for us to think about as well in our community interactions? Okay. The way I asked this in my notes was, how has proximity to some of these new topics bled into your current go-to agenda and your ways of working? So I'm wondering whether anybody has a thought about that.
I mean, certainly every community I'm in and every meeting I'm in informs other meetings. I worked for a little while at Amazon, and that place is well known for having meetings where you show up with a 6-page document and everyone sits quietly for 10 minutes and reads it and marks it up. And then you discuss the document. And this is such a different feeling than everywhere else, where people assume that they're in the same contextual topic because they saw the title. and I haven't carried that other places, but I still love that idea and that ideal of starting a meeting by getting the context right in a way that isn't one person grandstanding. That's just an example, but I think every community you're in, of course, you learn the skills and tools and rituals of that community, and some of them are are more functional than others.
Right. I remember somebody telling me, so do you know what dot voting is? Dot voting, right? And I said, maybe not under that name, and then I was explained to, how an opinion of the whole might be captured through sticking dots on the ideas that you were most in favor of, or least in favor, whatever the dimension was that you're paying attention to. But that felt to me like one of the kinds of it's the tool that's available in the digital realm, if you have the right stuff, to be able to vote on things like that. But can you track it in the same way if you don't have it on a big document that everybody's looking at? And so there's got to be some, and that's why what is this? We're on Zoom, has things built in like polls or whiteboards or other kinds of tools that might allow people to stay in the same context more easily. I just got a little laugh comment. Oh, that was Ted. I see.
I was just
I was going to throw
following up on what you said.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, Nancy, talking about that made me think of Ray Dalio's book, Principles.
I don't know that one.
Where he was the founder of a hedge fund that, he's a billionaire, basically made from this hedge fund, and they are one of the most successful hedge funds in the country. And he started writing books. He's written like 2 or 3 of them now in the last few years. And he has very distinctive ideas about how to run a business, and you could think of it as a business community. And they have things like they're supposedly dedicated to total transparency. So, if you like something, somebody's saying, great. If you don't like it, you'll just tell them exactly what you don't like about it. And they have tools for in an environment where there's a meeting, everybody's got a digital thing in front of them where they can put sort of like a dot voting kind of thing of like whether they like it or they don't like it or whatever as it's going on. So, and he's created an app, which I'm not too familiar with, for iOS to implement some of these ideas, and also for you to clarify your own principles and things. So he's doing some interesting stuff here. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Super. Okay. Thank you for the, every time I try to select this from the chat, it opens the page for me. Thank you so much. Okay. That sounds very interesting. And of course, then the business community, a work community, might be operating differently, obviously, from a avocational kind of community, a professional society, which has implications, but not every, sorry, I'm thinking about 2 things at once here. Anyway, yeah.
Well, what I'm enjoying, Jeffrey, is that you just keep bringing up references that are outside of my normal purview, and that's kind of fun.
Absolutely.
Next question.
Yeah, hold on. I'm just taking a couple of notes. Okay, good. Well, I was hoping to ask this group, what questions did you come with that we didn't get to yet? Because I'm sure each of you had a point of view that you brought to the meeting, and we probably haven't reviewed all those points of view yet.
Well, in my opening salvo, I brought up something I really believe in and would love to talk about more if any people are interested, which is I believe that, you know, that going to a conversation where you don't know what the reason is, and you don't have a place for it is a little bit dicey. And I've never been very comfortable going to a bar to meet people, but going to a climbing gym to meet people, I feel very comfortable with. So I have this belief that social media and community building has to start will be improved when we focus more on why we're building the community and have a social context. It's just a belief of mine. Any reactions?
Yeah, well, that certainly makes me think of Meetup as a way, because you're talking about a community where people are actually doing something together when you're talking about a climbing gym, right? So Meetup, of course, was doing that quite a bit, and they took a big hit from the pandemic. A lot of groups went virtual, which has some significant advantages in terms of reach and getting a diversity of people from geographically dispersed areas. I think it's an interesting approach. It's a different kind of community than maybe some of these other strictly online communities.
Or it might be an online event that people are doing together, which like we're doing tonight.
Right. Right. And I'll just say that, for this endeavor that people have heard me talk about several times in previous Bake High conversations, a group of us, a very small community, 5 of us, put together a whole summer program, which was something like 120 recorded hours of content. And we are continuing to build the community that started around those ideas. And we have employed Zoom and then a proximity chat tool, Ted, which is like one of these things when you're close to the person in this map, you can hear them. That's the proximity chat. And when you're distant from them, you can't. And there are protected spaces on the map where anybody standing in those set of squares can hear one another. And of course, there's a video component to this particular one that I'm familiar with, so that you can actually have a conversation like this, a small group meeting, but you assemble and then you form and unform quickly if you like. You don't have to have a conversation that is enduring over multiple days or multiple sessions or whatever. You could just do the networking thing in this way, more similarly to how we might do it in physical space, because you can physically move your icon, your avatar around and then be close to different kinds of people, right?
So are you talking about the online tool Spatial Chat?
I'm actually talking about a different version of that called gather.town. I put it in the chat. I don't know if you've had a chance to try that one.
Yeah, that's the one
I
I've
don't
used.
know that.
It's got really simple graphics, I don't know how many bit graphics, but they're like 16 or 32-bit graphics. They're really not fancy at all. But it's very effective in portraying a large physical space. And then, of course, you can do all the wonderful digital stuff that you never thought you could do, like go through the fireplace to find yourself on the beach or whatever. So different parts of the map can connect in different ways for silliness. These aren't necessarily realistic maps.
They're structured to help organize the conversation.
Right. And then it's, so in the space that we created, we've got a couple of big meeting rooms with, theoretically, you sit in rows and you can listen to somebody, or tiny little rooms for office hours, or a big open lounge space where there are protected, 15 or 20 conversational areas that you can occupy and people can move around at will. But like I don't know how many people have attended unconferences, which is also an interesting organization of human activity, right? The rule being, stay as long as you're interested in what they're talking about, and you don't have to make any excuse to get up and excuse yourself and walk out. You don't even have to say that. You can go to some other meeting where you might have more to contribute, or you might learn more, even in the same 1 hour period.
But in any case, I brought up this idea of structure again.
Yeah.
And I just I was kind of interested in what people think. How critical is structure to helping people feel oriented when they're trying to be part of a community?
Well, I think Edwin said the first one, which is he feels that structure in the terms of a calendar, of a consistent calendar, a rhythm to the meetings, is an important element. But you're talking about several other kinds of structure potentially, right, Ted?
Yes, I'm saying that time is one piece of structure, and you just gave these physical boundaries. We have the breakout rooms in Zoom.
Right.
Do we have other kinds of ways of structuring that helps people in their building of their communities? Structure of a mentor, a mentee, relationships, a group identity. All those are structural elements, I think.
Sure.
Can people think of other ones, or ones they thought were particularly effective that we haven't thought about or talked about much?
I mean, along the lines of your mentor-mentee, I think there's general pre-existing social relationships. If that can be reflected somehow in the meeting, that might be helpful, but I mean, it is potentially structure, right? Spatial Chat, another video conferencing platform, it actually has sort of screen distance between your avatars as a thing that actually makes a difference in the interaction, such that if my avatar is right next to your avatar, we hear each other perfectly. If I move my avatar 4 inches to the right away from yours, you hear my audio much diminished.
Right.
So in a big room, potentially, you could have several groups, each sort of generally clumped, but I think and so they may have their own little side conversations, but the fact that you're all in the same room makes it easy for one person to sort of drift from one conversation potentially into the sphere of another conversation.
Right. So the geometry of the screen allows you to feel like you're in the same room.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That's an interesting phenomenon, right? Because there are so many ways in which the digital tools don't match the real world. And yet, if you can feel like you're in the same room, I'll just go talk to so-and-so over here. Susie's over there. I need to catch up with her. Excuse me, right? One of those kind of things.
Does that mean like VR and meta stuff will be more useful in that sense, physically moving around that way?
I have no idea. I have no speculation because I have really old experience with any of the VR stuff. I haven't been looking at it more recently. So other people who have should chime in.
I was just going to mention AirMeet is another one that has a kind of a certain structure where there's a main presentation capability, and then there are also tables that can be of different sizes. Typically, there'll be like 8 people. So the host or manager of the meeting will set up subjects or topics, or maybe the name of one of the presenters for each table, and then people can join or leave the table at will and have discussions on these different things. So that's worth looking at. Mm-hmm. Also, another thing that came into my head when we were talking about avatars in spatial chat, I was thinking about in games. Certainly one can design one's own avatar in game worlds. And one of the organizing principles is having a specific goal typically I think they're called quests. I'm not really a gamer, but and people sort of look the same, but they have some differences. So there's something about them that might identify them as a particular group within that game world and things of that sort.
So these AR and VR things, these, the avatars and stuff, have not been very successful. We're watching Edwin Lee coming and going from a virtual background, by the way. As we're today talking about this. And yet there is, 5 different times in my career, the whole world has believed that AR and VR are going to take over and be everything. Now, I can imagine that, at some point, not having to have a monitor in front of me and wearing my glasses, just looking at a white wall might be interesting. But up till now, most of those experiences that are about communication and community building have been extremely distracting. And it's hard to know whether it's distracting in the way that video conferencing was back when Bill Buxton and many people in the early 80s wrote that video conferencing was worse than telephone calls in terms of collaboration. And that was, I think, because there was lag and hysteresis in your conversation, so that there was not your voice and the video were unmatched, breaking all sorts of social norms, and the delay was such that you had a hard time having a conversational interchange. And I think we're going to learn what are those breakages, what the things that cause those breakages in AR and VR. But part of it's probably going to be by doing something things that are simpler and more productive, such as what AR and VR is useful for right now, which is giving people orienting lists that they can walk through as they're putting some manufacturing element together or doing some inventorying things, not necessarily supporting social interaction. So
it's a shared workspace that you create then, and you can all point to the same thing and know you're pointing to that kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Well, that stuff's been amazing. I mean, that's a watershed. This Google Docs and Onshape, everything now lets you have multiple cursors on it and share it with another person, and those kind of collaborations. I think that is the real stuff.
Yes, and the adoption of it is so variable by community. Academics are still using Word and very unfamiliar with and not trusting of documents that can be multiply edited. So they pass whole copies around, back and forth. You have these versions. Version control is hard. Even in non-code based stuff, version control is hard.
So I think a little bit from the game aspect, and you were talking about like the rock climbing stuff. Part of it, I think, is coming in, being able to do some easy tasks, start easy entry points that you can get some results from, and look at Wikipedia. You just want to be able to change something in an article, right? That's kind of your starting point. But then there's this whole huge depth to it that you're not expected to know right away, but you're still able to get something done in those entry points. And if you can, if you have their shared goal of what you're trying to work on, that's explicit, or people come in with sometimes multi agendas that they're trying to work out, and that's fine too, depending on what the organization is trying to achieve or what the purpose is.
Good point. Thank you. Well, this has been a wide-ranging conversation, and I appreciate everybody sticking with it. I'm looking to see if I left anything out that we wanted.
Oh,
to
nothing.
focus
I'm
on.
sure we've covered everything.
We've covered the whole thing. Well, thank goodness for that. I'm so
I got
glad
another comment, Nancy.
Yeah, Jeffrey, go ahead.
So thinking about communities and, in the real world, in the past, fraternities had things like hazing to become a member. So there was some, you had to go through some rite of passage whether that was, horrible or not so horrible. Also, it occurs to me that there's some interesting things perhaps to be learned from political organizing. So anyone who's organized is kind of trying to create a community that has the same goal to get certain people elected. And the way that those are organized, there's something, the ladder of engagement, where you start out with very simple, actions like you sign a petition or something like that. Then maybe you send an email to your politician, then maybe you make a phone call, then maybe you go knock on some door. So there's this whole kind of ladder of engagement that they try to walk people through to as they become more and more central and then take on leadership roles in that community. So there could be something like that. There is a little bit, I think, in Wikipedia. There's editors and, there's kind of managers that sort of evolve in a similar way, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. And I just mentioned in the chat, Byron Hurt, who is a documentary filmmaker of my acquaintance, it has just released this week a film called Hazing. And it is about all those things that go on in colleges. And he was a fraternity boy in his time, and a football player, but has turned into a, award-winning filmmaker. So I'm recommending to all of you.
Okay.
We are now at 8:49. We have, we usually stop around 9 o'clock. I'm happy to stop sooner if we don't have more topics to at least mention. I don't think we're finishing anything here, but I'm glad to start this conversation. And I think that our conversation will also help Kat, if she is available soon, to be able to structure her comments in juxtaposition to our meandering conversation here. So I appreciate everybody sticking with it.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to have to go off. If there's other things that people want to talk about, that'd be fine, but I have to leave here.
Thank you for sticking with it as long as you did. Did we ever push record? Yes.
Okay.
I think I didn't push record.
Steve probably did.
I hope Steve pushed record,
It's
but I'm not
streaming to
seeing
YouTube.
it here.
It's on YouTube, so.
It's on YouTube. We didn't get a recording. Oh,
Well, I don't know about,
I think I didn't push record.
I see that I have the record function available to me.
Yes, I do too, but I didn't actually do it.
you can
Right, I
download
know.
it. from
But
YouTube.
we've got the
What-
thing, we've got the YouTube
You can download it from
conversation.
there and like.
Yeah. Yeah. Not quite the same quality, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine for these
It'll do.
purposes. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming. Do come back again. I wish Ted were here to tell us who he's going to feature next month. I will say that I know who's coming in November. It's going to be Christian Crumlish, who was in this role as a program chair several years ago before I took over one of those slots. And he's going to talk about his book from Rosenfeld called UX to Product Management or something like that. But
Oh,
it's very much about product management and whether UXers are good candidates for product managers. And so I think that you can review the book, précis, and he's probably got a first chapter or one chapter available on the Rosenfeld site. And I'm negotiating with him about how we're going to get content that's beyond just the book. And I think he's been having a bunch of productive conversations over the last 6 months since the book came out. We tried to get him earlier, and his calendar and our calendars didn't coordinate until November. So we'll be happy to see you on that date.
One thing to note as a loss from our having taken our Bakais from physical to virtual space is that we can no longer buy a physical book directly from the speaker and have him autograph it.
Right. That's more difficult for sure. And that is something that we have done in the past from time to time. Well, thanks once again and for joining me in this conversation about communities and managing communities. And I look forward to seeing you next month and the second Tuesday of the month in a continuing way. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll say good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for participating. I appreciate it.
It's very good.
Good.
I like.
I'll make sure that I note all those references also that people were giving so that we can add those to the comments on the program entry. You know, the calendar entry will include some additional remarks about all these references that we've been collecting. Okay,
Awesome. Thank you.
cool. Good night and see you next
Good
week.
night.